Welcome back, everybody, to Pod Places. I am Jeff Sigler with Revitalize or Die here in Pittsburgh, joined by, as always, friend
Phil,
in Michigan. Oh, I stepped right
oh,
over your
yeah,
line.
do you want to intro me
I don't
or do
know.
you
That
want
one's
me to
always.
intro myself?
I want you to intro yourself, but I always, it's always awkward. We got to get that down.
You're just really excited about saying my name, I think. My name's Phil Ike. I'm in Bay City, Michigan with Full Steam social media.
And we told our regular contributor Ryan to take the week off, and we have replaced him. We'll see whether it's permanent, but really, really happy this week to have Melody Warnick join us. Melody is a freelance writer and author of the book "This Is Where You Belong: Finding Home Wherever You Are." She's also done work for New York Times, or written pieces for the New York Times, Reader's Digest, Fast Company,
Oh,
Guardian, Slate,
wow.
Quartz, CityLab, Woman's Day, Good Housekeeping, Redbook, the Oprah Magazine, Medium, and Livability, which is a
I'm bowing down. If you're listening to this podcast, you can't see it, but I'm bowing at Melody's feet right now.
Thank you.
yeah, pretty impressive.
I'm used to that totally. Bowing.
How did you get into writing, Melody?
It is my only skill. So
Necessity.
yeah, it was a fairly clear path in my mind from, doing high school newspaper to going to college, majored in English. And when I graduated, I worked for a little while as an editor, and then I had a kid and I wanted to be able to stay home with my child, but still work. And I figured out there was this thing called freelance writing where magazines would hire people, on a one-off basis to write articles for them. And I'm like, I'm going to do that. So I started by writing for the local magazine in St. George, Utah, where we were living at the time. My very first article, I made 10 cents a word, and I wrote about local parks, like this roundup of local parks. And then I just kind of kept going and writing for, trying to write for bigger and better publications. So
were they shocked when you submitted 50,000 words every week on local parks?
they're like, this seems a little excessive. The details about going down the slides. No, yeah, I had a little kid, so I'd write all about, parenting stuff. And then as I have gone through various stages of life, I tend to write about the things that I'm just curious about, or things that affect me personally, which is really how I ended up writing a book about place, because my husband and I got married out of college, and then we ended up moving. Your 20s are that period of life when you do tend to move a lot. And so we moved for a job, and then moved for another job, and moved for grad school. And we moved 5 times in 12 years. And I would move into a new community and just be like, this sucks. It's hard to move. And some moves are easier than others, and you're not quite sure why. And so it really opened up this big question in my mind of, why do some places feel like a better fit? And how can you start to feel at home in a community that isn't your home? And how do you settle down and drop roots in a new place?
So that brings me to kind of an interesting question, and this is maybe maybe deeper than we should go right away. But it makes me wonder, when you say that there's some places you move to that suck, and some places that you move to that you find more, I don't know, easier or more enjoyable or welcoming. And I wonder, do you believe it's something sort of intrinsic in that community that is different in the places that you found that were more welcoming or habitable, or was it just where you were at that time in your life, or something else?
I think it is a mix of factors. I tend to think that places have personalities in the same way that people have personalities. And to really fall deeply, madly in love with the place you're living requires finding that fit between yourself and the place. But that's also about life stage. It's about attitude. You can move to a new place and find, make one friend that can make the difference between an amazing experience and a miserable experience in a community. I've also seen people who are living in towns that feel like a great fit, say when they're raising kids or when they're young and single for a certain period in their life. And then as they, get older, enter a different life stage, it no longer works as well for them. So it's kind of, it's like any other relationship in our life where, certain people might really help us and feel like a good fit at certain points in our life. And then, for whatever reason, we kind of outgrow them, we move on. So a lot, which all sounds like very kind of vague, you just got to find that right fit. But that was, my husband and I moved to Ames, Iowa for him to go to grad school. And Iowa is like the ultimate flyover state, right? Like the state that no one gets right. They think it's Ohio or Idaho. No one knows where it is. And at the point we were driving into town in a U-Haul, I had never been there. I had never been to the Midwest really at all. And we had no idea what to expect, but expectations were definitely low. And maybe that helped, but the fact of just being there, we found that something about it really fit us. Something about just like good old fashioned Iowan people, like we'd go to the grocery store and they had like the bag boys would wheel your grocery cart out and load your groceries in the car. It's just like this really friendly place. And I'm from California originally, like grew up in Southern California, like the town right north of where Disneyland is. And this was a foreign experience to me, but by the end of it, we lived there for 6 years. I really felt Midwestern at heart. I felt like, something, go Midwest.
Yeah.
Something about it really spoke to who I was as a person. And I think we have that sometimes. Like I think in my book, I was describing a friend of mine who is just kind of like a little edgy and like dyes her hair cool colors. And she lives in Austin, Texas. And you're like, yes, like that is exactly the right place for her. And it makes sense. But we don't always end up in those places that seem like just the world's most amazing fit for us. And we have to try and turn the town that we're into, into a good fit. And that was kind of the thing I wanted to figure out in my book was, what do you do when you're in the place that you don't love? And how do you come to love it?
So I'm intrigued. What do you do? Because a lot of people talking or listening to this podcast are thinking, I might be in that place, a place that I don't necessarily get along with well, or that seems like it's not a good fit, or I find myself constantly looking at these other cities that I think might be better. So I'm intrigued by the idea of simply making your place a good fit for you. So what did you find?
So yeah, that was my experience. So we were living in Austin, Texas, and my husband got a job in Blacksburg, Virginia at Virginia Tech. And I like to tell people, it's in the part of Virginia that you don't think about, like the little tail end of Virginia by West Virginia and Tennessee. And it's pretty Southern. It's, in Appalachia. And we came here and I had been here for maybe a couple weeks and was just like, no, like, this is not working out. I didn't, immediately experience that feeling of like, oh yeah, this is my place. And yeah, like you just said, Phil, I think a lot of us spend a lot of time thinking about, would my life be better in another town? You know, like you go on vacation somewhere, you're like, yes, like everything about my life would be better if I moved. We have these fantasies about it. And so I had this fantasy about moving to Blacksburg. And then when I got here and realized that that was, you know, delusional, it was like, okay, we're just going to move again. Forget this. And, you know, realize realistically that wasn't going to happen. And I had to figure it out. I had to figure out how to put down roots. So pretty instinctively, I realized that that is a conscious choice we make in the places we live and are. That sometimes we get lucky and we just find a really good fit and it feels really natural and it happens really easily. But more often than not, feeling at home in a community, and I think this is true whether it's a new community for you or just someplace you've lived for a while, requires intention, and it requires conscious effort and behavioral change to make yourself feel at home. So, you know, one of the very first things I did, we hadn't been there very long, and I got the local newspaper, always a good first step. And I saw that the community was holding an event. It was called the Mayor's Bike Ride. And it was like, you know, come gather at this local elementary school and the mayor will be there and he'll lead us on a bike ride downtown. And it was just like this, you know, it was meant to be a community building event. There was going to be cookies afterward, and that's always important. And so I dragged my family to this. And I remember we were, you know, our kids were pretty little, 5 and 10 at that point. And we were lined up on our bikes waiting for this parade to start. And we were looking around and realizing, you know, it appears that we're the only ones here who don't know anyone. Like everyone else is like, hey, it's been all summer, you know, greeting their friends. And we're just sitting there kind of, you know, here is our attempt to really integrate into this new community, and we're feeling lonelier and lonelier. And then the mayor walked up, and I had kind of been watching him. He's the, you know, at the time he was this guy with this bushy Tom Selleck mustache, and he was walking around greeting people, and he came up to us and was just like, hey, you know, I'm really glad you're here. He had no idea who we were. But he was friendly to us in a way that sort of broke the ice with Blacksburg for me. Like, there are good people here and we don't know them, but we'll get to know them and it'll be okay. So that started me on this journey of kind of trying to figure out what are the other behaviors that we need to do. And because I've been a freelance writer, I'm used to sort of, you know, looking at the research, looking at what experts say about this. And I started, you know, hunting around in the literature about place and came across this concept of place attachment, which you guys call community pride, you know, like pride in place, place attachment, place love, all these interchangeable phrases that basically amount to loving where you live and feeling rooted there. And it is hugely important for our sense of self-identity, for our sense of belonging. And so I would read these articles and I would see, okay, what are place attached people doing? Like, what are behaviors that seem tied to place attachment, and can I do them? And it was totally non-scientific. You know, I'm not a sociologist. It was just kind of like, I bet that'll work. You know, like if, you know, someone in Texas did this thing and it helped him be more place attached, I bet that'll work for me in Blacksburg. And so that's what I did. I just kind of identified behaviors, and I did what I called love where you live experiments, like these little micro action steps that were designed to kind of help me emulate what I thought someone who really loved where they lived would do in their spare time, like the kinds of behaviors I thought I would see in someone like them, and I just did them.
But I It's a lot to add to all of that. I do look forward to hearing, though, what some of those things were. But you touched on so many things that I think were valuable. But the one that strikes me that I always come back to is you mentioned like it's kind of like a relationship, and I very much agree that place is like a relationship, and it's partially finding the right person or the right place. That is half the equation, because your friend that dyes their hair will fit in more in Austin than Ames. That's going to be a very, not to say you can't, but it's, there's places that certain people are going to gravitate towards because that's a fit for them culturally, or, whether it's an outdoorsy town or whether it's a fast-paced business town, like that all makes sense simultaneously. I think there's that other side of, to be a good partner in a relationship, you also have to be, it's not just the person you're with, it's the person who you are. And comes back to that kind of, it's really hard to love someone that doesn't love themselves. And I think that is a big part of kind of this issue, is like, if you move to a community that despises itself, it's really hard to love it. It's really like, it makes it so hard for you to engage with it or be affectionate with it when every time you do anything, everybody's like, well, it sucks here, I hate it here, and this town doesn't, like, we hate ourselves so much that you can't possibly like us. And it's sort of this defense mechanism that keeps people from ever engaging or growing affectionate. So I think that is a really interesting idea, that, right, you need to move toward, you hope to find a place that has some commonality, some personality traits that fit yours. At the same time, you have some responsibilities as an individual to be a good resident, to do what you can to strengthen that relationship, because it's a relationship in the end. Your relationship to your community is just that. And all relationships require maintenance, they require action, and you have to be, if you want something out of it, you have to put something into it.
Yeah, it's interesting, that idea of low self-esteem in communities. I've talked to a lot of people who will say things like, when I first moved to this community, people would come up to me and be like, why did you come here? Like, what could possibly make you want to live in Youngstown or wherever? And, I didn't have to grapple with that in Blacksburg. Blacksburg was kind of the opposite. It was a place that people who lived here really did love it. And I would have to be like, why? What's going on? But yeah, when you live in a community that is struggling with itself, is struggling with its own identity and self-acceptance, it makes it that much harder for anyone to go down that road of saying, I really want to see what's great about this community, and I want to be intentional about falling in love with it. And yeah, it is very reminiscent of relationships. You might be able to see the good in someone, but if that person keeps telling you over and over again that they're worthless, it takes a lot of energy to power through that. And I think, part of this too is in relationships where we are changed by the relationships. And that was one of the things that I had to figure out when I came to Blacksburg, that because it didn't feel immediately like this amazing fit, I kind of had to learn to allow myself to be shaped by the community. There was, I have a list in the book of sort of things that I learned from this journey, from learning about place attachment. And one was, every town is good at something. Do what your town is good at. And it was kind of this idea that, like, I grew up in Southern California, and, I would have birthday parties at Disneyland. Like, this is, like, this spoiled upbringing that I had, but I was kind of used to, like, that's what you do on a weekend, is you go to an amusement park, you go to Universal Studios or something, and you don't do that in Blacksburg, Virginia. So you have to figure out, what do you do in Blacksburg, Virginia? And there were things that my town is really excited about and engaged in that were not a super good fit for me. It's a college town, home to Virginia Tech, and football is really big here, and tailgating, and I am not into either of those things. But I sort of like trained myself to be into it, went to sporting events, went to football games, learned to be excited about Virginia Tech the way most of the locals are. And that took some time, but it's kind of this commitment you make to acknowledge the goodness that exists in your town before you try to change it. Changing it is, might be part of it too, but accepting your town for what it is.
Just continuing the metaphor of relationships, it's similar to if you're endlessly comparing your current girlfriend or boyfriend to your ex-girlfriend or boyfriend. It's like, well, they used to cook me pancakes on Saturday and you've never cooked me pancakes. I mean, like, that's just a recipe for constantly being disappointed because you're trying to fit this person into this mold that they are not that mold. They are a brand new person. And so to be endlessly comparing them and saying, well, you're not that, is a disservice to them, and everybody's going to walk away unhappy. And it sounds like a similar situation with packing up and moving into a new city. If you're endlessly comparing it to say, well, there's no Disney World here on the weekends, like, what a bummer. Like, are you kidding me? You guys don't have a Disney World here?
Where is your Disney World?
Yeah, where's your Disney World? Or I have my surfboard and, like, I don't see an ocean anywhere in Blacksburg, Virginia. And so that's an interesting correlation there, that you have to be willing to do what your place does best, even if it's not necessarily in your wheelhouse or the thing that motivates you or your passion. Like, you have to look at your city and say, hey, we're doing community bike rides, we'll do community bike rides.
Yeah, exactly. And I love that comparison, like, Disney World versus Pancakes, or, my town's never going to have Disney World. Most towns are never going to have Disney World. We only have a few of those. And, if you live in a place that doesn't have a beach, you're not going to be surfing. And no matter how much you wish you were, it's just not going to happen. Sometimes we can say, my old girlfriend made me pancakes, and this new girlfriend doesn't make pancakes, and I'm annoyed by that. So I'm just going to make the pancakes myself. I will become the pancake maker in this relationship. And that happens in towns too, right? Where you see something that you loved in another community, and you figure out a way to bring it to this town. But I think before we do that, before we get to the place where we're like, I'm the new placemaker in my community, we have to start with that level of appreciation and love for what's there, acknowledgement for what is. Like, I've spent a lot of time, I speak about this fairly often. I've spent a lot of time talking about, when you're really engaged and passionate about your community, you change it. You come in, you have your good ideas, and you're going to make things happen. And I still like that idea. I still, support the idea of members of communities getting involved to make things happen that they want to see there. But I also think we see that pushback in communities where people who've lived there for a long time are resistant to that change. And I think it's a little bit, it's like getting a new boss in your workplace, and they come in and they just say, we're overhauling everything. And you want to just say, wait a minute, like, we're doing some stuff right, maybe pause and listen and, talk to us, acknowledge what's going well. So I think it's a mix there, like, you want to have people who are passionate about their communities and who are willing to step up and make exciting things happen, like start the festival, or, revamp the old theater or something like that. But feel like it needs to start from a place of love and appreciation, as opposed to, this place sucks and I'm going to fix it.
That's interesting you should say that. And I think a lot about dysfunctional communities, and have come to, I think, specialize in dysfunctional communities. But those are attributes that I see a lot, that, like, in a healthy community, people care so much that they want things to improve. It's just like personally, like a healthy person will always strive for self-improvement, want to learn more, want to be in better shape, will want to, always get better. And somebody that's struggling won't. They are resistant to change. And cities are very similar, that if you have a bunch of citizens that really love their town, they're going to show up to council, they're going to try to improve the park system, they're going to want new bike trails, etc. And they'll push for that. And that's exactly what you want as a city leader, as a council member, as a city manager. Like, thank God for residents actively pushing for improvement. But in a dysfunctional town, very few people want to change anything. And then when they do, the pushback is overwhelming. Like, nope, it's fine. Why change? We can't change. There's no reason. There's no sense in changing here. And you're like, oh, it's funny. Everybody, dislikes this town at the same time. You're all so resistant to doing anything different, it doesn't make sense, but it's just a sign of that dysfunction of not knowing how or grappling with how to change or do better or be different.
Right. And the idea that you can love your community and still want to improve it. Loving a place doesn't mean just accepting everything about it and not ever dreaming bigger. I think when you really love your community, you can have a vision for it. And for people who lived in communities for a really long time, that gets hard because they know the history of the town so well. They've seen it go through all these different phases, and there's just like a lot of weight and emotion there. So sometimes it does seem like it takes the new person moving in to really be willing to kind of turn things upside down a little bit. But I think that you can love your community and want it to be better. And in fact, loving your community usually leads to wanting it to be better.
I'm really interested in all of this conversation by the link of action and attachment, because sometimes the unspoken impression is that it's up to a specific place to create that attachment and do all the things and make people love them. Like, I, as a resident of Bay City, Michigan, that attachment, I should almost be a victim of that attachment. I shouldn't have a choice, because look at the government, it's doing all these cool events and the roads are all fixed and all of these things are like it's checking all these boxes for me, and behold, I am now attached to my place. But like in your case, you're looking at it from the other end of saying, we as people and residents almost have a responsibility to do things that make ourselves become attached to the place, because we're an important part of this community, and it's up to us to go to the coffee shop, even if I'm totally fine with making my Folgers at home for the rest of my days. I'm going to go to the coffee shop because that's where people meet people.
Right. And there's two approaches to this. One is the approach, I want to behave in these certain ways because it's going to help my community. And as I looked at place attachment, there were behaviors that I undertook just because I knew that they were better for the town. Things like shopping at locally owned stores, or shopping at the farmer's market, or things like that. But then there's this element that it's pretty self-interested to develop place attachment for yourself. There's a lot of research that says when you are place attached, you have higher levels of well-being, you have higher levels of self-esteem, social capital, you're healthier, you're less likely to have a heart attack or a stroke. And all these behaviors that lead to place attachment and are really good for communities, because place attached people do things that are good for communities, like volunteer or invest locally or shop locally, things like that, also happen to be really good for you as a person and your mental and emotional well-being. So it's, for me, it was like, I want to make myself happier here. I'm not sure how long I'm going to be here, but even 6 months or a year is too long to be miserable. And so I started doing these love where you live experiments, kind of just as a way to make myself feel better about where I was in this town. So some of them are really simple things like taking walks more often in my neighborhood, as a way to develop a mental map of my community and feel like I had a sense of ownership over it. Or I started hiking. That was one of the things that my town was good at. We're right next to the Appalachian Trail. It's pretty outdoorsy here. I was not necessarily a super outdoorsy person, but that was one of the things that I kind of learned to do. I started volunteering more often. But all these things, they tend to be good simultaneously for the individual and the community, and both grow. So when you have people in town who are interested in becoming place attached and who are willing to take steps to make that happen, usually the community benefits. I talk a lot about in the book about the Knight Foundation's Soul of the Community study. And they looked at what made people happy in towns, but also found this connection that when there were high levels of place attachment in community levels of GDP went up. So the town does better economically when the people who live there love it. And, you're sort of like, well, is it just that people like to live in communities that are already thriving? But the researchers said it's actually that, when people are choosing to behave in these place attached ways, it helps the community because they're more likely to, again, shop locally, start a business, buy real estate, invest locally, things that help the community economically. So it's all kind of, tangled up. And as we help ourselves, we help our town.
Right. We were fortunate enough to have Catherine Laughlin on with come on when we did the 3-day bender a while back, and loved her work with that. And it just, to me, it seems sort of, obvious that as people love their town, the town's going to be more successful. That, when you're attached to something, you take care of it. And I think that's frustrating that there is so little conversation around that. Like, there's so much money dumped into economic development and tourism and whatever different projects, and nothing is ever really invested into how do we make people love our town. And I think that's the biggest mistake. Like, you're not going to get any new jobs in your town if everybody hates your town. You're not going to get people to come and visit your town if everyone hates your town. On the other hand, if you spend a little money in cultivating that affection and that attachment, and getting people, like, as people grow, to have more friends in their community, they're going to feel more rooted. They're going to love their community. They're going to want, like, I'm not showing up to council just, if for whatever reason, but if all of a sudden some decision's going to affect all my friends in town, all these families that I care about, like, that's different. I guess that becomes more personal the more relationships you have in town. Or if you love your town, you're going to get online and post how great it is. So I find that that's such a huge sort of oversight in the that most cities don't really pay attention to. Is simple act of cultivating that sort of love and affection is going to be the best thing you can do for your town. That will fix all these other things, and that's never really thought of. It's always blown off as like, well, that's fluff. That's that might be nice. That's great if you're a kindergarten teacher, but we're running a city, and it's like, well, actually, you're running a city full of people, and people still have emotions, and you'd probably be best to tend to those emotions.
Yes, 100%. Everything you just said. I totally agree. I think some communities are starting to sort of pay attention to these livability factors that make people more likely to fall in love with where they live. But I like to think about the story of Oklahoma City, which, I think is an example of, a city that turned itself around by focusing on these, livability factors, parks and walking trails and things that, aren't just throwing incentives at huge businesses to get them to live there, because those businesses have to know that their employees are willing to live in your town. And I think that, we talk a lot about, things like walking trails and as just like these small bits of livability that make places more lovable. But I think, say you're a person who's being recruited to a new workplace, and you go drive through the local town to see what it's like. there are certain things that will indicate to you that this is a place that people love, and there are people who are invested in living here. And it might be stuff that seems dumb, like a mural, or, you know, like some cool events or something. But even a town that is maybe struggling and doesn't have it all figured out yet can have those small, you know, those small love letters and those little signs that someone here cares about this community. And that makes people who are thinking about moving there feel so much happier about it. You know, like, oh yeah, like I can love it too.
Yeah, it's right. And I think that there's this responsibility between, you know, like going back to the relationships, like if your city isn't right where you want it to be, you have to do something. But that's entirely possible. You know, I've told the story in many a presentation where when I first moved to this town in Ohio, you don't really have any friends there, and that's, you know, social life is really important to me. So I started a kickball league, and it was awesome. Like, it turned into this whole big thing, and I met some friends that I still have today. It brought a group of people together, and it really turned into something special. There was, you know, all of a sudden, all these people cared about town because they cared about one another. And it created some political capital where we were able to, you know, stave off a demolition. It turned into something far more. And that one simple step, you know, just created, you know, hundreds of new friendships, from people going out and doing something as silly as kicking a ball in a park and drinking beer afterwards. But, you know, people need that. And sometimes I think there's too much focus on, like, well, what do we do for the kids, and where do we, you know, and there's like kids. And it's like, you know what, adults actually need social opportunities too. And adults need to have the chance to connect with one another. And in doing that, you're kind of going to get more people that champion your city, and are like those are going to be the people that are run for council down the road. That you need that sort of leadership. I think you are on mute.
um,
Oh my God, whatever you said there looked amazing.
it was amazing, and I'm not going to repeat it either. No. Sorry about that. One thing that I think about a lot is that when we talk about places, we are actually talking about communities. Like, we're talking about the people who live in the place. And it is really hard to be truly place attached if you are not community attached. Like, if you don't feel like you belong in this community, you don't have friends here, you don't have connections. I talk in my book about getting to know your neighbors, which I think is something that it's a dying art, you know, like people just, I think we saw a resurgence with COVID, actually. I think for the first time in a long time, people started paying attention to their neighbors and offering help. But I think as a rule, most of us kind of live sort of solitary lives. We don't necessarily interact with the people who live right around us. But a really basic way to develop place attachment is to go next door and introduce yourself. That was one of my Love Where You Live experiments, was taking banana muffins to our neighbors. It was like so basic and dumb, but it was kind of a breakthrough moment for some of us, you know, like talk to the guy across the street who had like these long dreadlocks and these ear gauges. And I am like the most middle American white lady there is. You would not have thought we would have like had a connection there, but we take these muffins over, and he so excited, and told us all about the history of the neighborhood. He had lived there longer than anyone. And it was this moment of feeling like part of the community. And, you know, community can be just your street, the houses around you, and then it kind of arcs out into your entire town as you get to know people. But I think you're exactly right, Jeff, that the knowing people, the having friends and connections and a sense of, you know, belonging here feeds that feeling of place identity, which is part of being attached. It's feeling like I am my town,
Right.
like the place where I live says a lot about me as a person. It is a huge part of who I am. That's, when you start to see people wearing t-shirts with the name of their town on it, the way they might with the name of their sports team or something, that's when oh, good. Like the people are starting to be place attached here. But I think that really happens when we develop the relationships that make us feel connected, and honestly give us the social capital we need to make stuff happen. Like you can have someone who's has some great ideas, but people are really intimidated by stuff like going to city council and or finding money for a project. But when you have 5 or 10 people who are excited about the same idea, that's powerful. And then you feel like you have the connections and the social capital you need to actually make change.
That's yeah, I love all that. It's such a fascinating concept, and right, I think that it's in part intentional, and also in part design. I was going through some of your articles earlier, and was reading the one on front porches, and I'm a big believer in front porches, that you can design community out of a neighborhood, and most neighborhoods have been designed exactly for that. Anything built in the last like 70 years is pretty poor at facilitating a sense of community. And so, yeah, you have to be intentional, but it also helps to be in a place with front porches and sidewalks and a walkable, coffee shop or ice cream parlor. That when you design a place, if you have to get in your car to get to everything, a sense of community is going to be much harder to achieve. And it's really unfortunate that cities haven't paid more attention to what they allow to get built, because again, that a sense of community, and like, I mean, even more so, I love the point about you get identity from your city. Like, I'm not from Pittsburgh. When I moved here, over time, I found that I was proud of this place because what it does, how it behaves, what it projects to the world. Like, I didn't have any hand in building Pittsburgh, but I live here and I love this place, and so it has an effect on me. And if people aren't proud of your place, like, you should do a better job as a city leader. And so, like, controlling what gets built is going to change how people feel, how they talk about it, how they feel about themselves, their own self-image, their own sense of pride. So it's all really wrapped up in a crazy way that I find fascinating. But again, like, cities for the most part, don't do a great job of thinking through those things and trying to foster greater outcomes.
Right. Like they're not paying attention to the right things. Because that's the thing. Like I wrote this whole book basically outlining, what you need to do personally if you want to feel like more in love with where you live. And the book is really practical. There's, checklists at the end of every chapter. So it's pretty hands-on with ideas and stuff to do. But the big question is, what happens if the people in your town don't want to do that? Like someone who's interested in this and maybe recognizes that, I don't really love my town, but I want to change that. You can hand them my book and it's great. And I've had people, email me and say things like that. Like I'm living in this town and I don't like it. And I read your book and it made a difference. And, now I'm running for town council, or I started this project, and that's really gratifying, obviously, to hear. But can you, and Phil kind of talked about this earlier, like, can you foist place attachment on people who aren't interested in it for themselves? And what can cities and towns do to make them, to make the community more attachable, to make it more lovable? And I think you can like reverse engineer a lot of the things that make people place attached. So if we know that walking and biking is more likely to make people place attached, which it is, then let's make walking paths and bike lanes and, make a walkable downtown, because that's going to make people more likely to fall in love with it. Or if we know that, independently locally owned stores and restaurants are one of the things that help people develop a sense of place identity as opposed to massive national chains, then our town can adopt policies to favor independent businesses over chains. We can come up with ways to make it easy for people to volunteer in communities. We can come up with ways, as town leaders to fund good ideas, to, make things like art and events easy for people who, like, I always think there's a huge disconnect between the average citizen with a good idea and knowing how to express that to someone in power, to, with the power and the authority and the money to authorize something like that. And I always think, towns would be really well served to, make some clear pathways there. I've seen some communities do like micro grants programs to allow, people to share an idea they're excited about and make it happen. So I think there is a way for cities to pay attention to this if they want to, if they realize how useful it is for them.
I think the paying attention is such an important part of it, because sometimes cities get this impression that if I just do this cookie cutter thing in my city, then everyone will love it. So they look at a neighboring city with a great public art program and they say, cool, we're going to do public art here. Come on over, everybody. Or I hear those mixed use buildings are trendy. We're going to build some mixed use things. But if it doesn't vibe with the community and what the community's values, and the people don't feel acknowledged, it's going to end up being apparently foisted. Like, it's going to be very obvious that this is a contrived action by the city rather than something that's been organic and grown. And here in Bay City, we have a relatively new development that came in, and I was thinking about, well, if I was in charge of marketing that development, how would I go about doing it? And it wouldn't be, unfortunately, the angle that they took was saying, well, this is going to be the Beverly Hills of the thumb of Michigan, the Bay of Michigan area. Like, look at all these trendy, look at all these trendy shops, and here's a slow motion video of models by the river and things like that. And the people in Bay City, when it came in, even though the development is amazing and it's a great home for lots of local businesses, things like that, the message to them was like, here comes this outsider doing something that is not Bay City at all. And immediately there's a rub there that it's going to be really hard for them to overcome, because everybody in Bay City is saying, or I don't say everybody, but a lot of people are saying, like, that's not us. This is fake. Get those rich folk out of there, when that's not the case. But if they're looking at it and said, hey guys, I hear Bay City is amazing. We want to become part of that. We want to help support the city. We want to get in on it. Like, all of these things, if that was the message, like, the outcome, I think, would have been completely different. So it's easy, I think, for people to just say, we'll just increase mixed use buildings, and then that checks our box, when you really have to pay attention to your community and say, what do we do well? What do we suck at? Who are the people that we can leverage? Like, what groups are already trying to do this work, and how can we amplify what they're trying to do?
Right. And the things that work really well in, a city of 200,000 people aren't necessarily transferable to a town of 30,000 people. And yeah, I love that idea that, if we really want to make a plan for our community that feels right here where we are, it has to be ground up. And that means, empowering people to have a voice in their town, to feel like they're heard, and, to not just have to show up at the city council meetings and, nag people and yell and scream and stuff, but that there's an actual way to share ideas for forward momentum.
I think we've talked a lot about how how we can do a better job of shaping place, but I would be interested in kind of in your experience having moved around so much, how place has shaped you, and how, when we can make an impact on our places, but also our places all have an impact on us and how we go about leading our lives and even who we become. Have what's been your experiences, how these different cities you've lived in have shaped your life?
Yeah, I love that question because I think for a long time in my life, I thought that uh, moving frequently was sort of like a personal moral failure. Like I failed to commit to my town and something is wrong with me. And now I can look back and see that all the places that I have lived have changed me and have helped me grow as people. Like in a really basic way, every place that you live and make friends and meet your neighbors, those people, enrich your life and make you a different person. And then, uh, you know, moving from Austin, Texas to Blacksburg, Virginia felt like a pretty big change. Austin is a good sized city and it's, has a reputation for being really hip. And yeah, I did get questions when we moved here, like, why would you leave Austin? Like Austin is the place that everyone wants to go to. But I have lived in Blacksburg, Virginia now for 8 years, and I feel like I've grown into this place in a really distinct way. And some of it is like, I don't tolerate traffic anymore. And,
Mm-hmm.
We go to Washington, D.C. and we're like, oh my gosh, what's going on? Um, I live in a place that is beautiful right out my front door. I can hear the horses in the field a couple blocks over. And that has added this element of, kind of peace and calm and appreciation for beauty to my life. But for all the good things that I've gotten out of Blacksburg, I have learned enough about this process to know that, you know, uh, even places that we love may not be forever in our lives, and that's okay. We can grow with them for as long as we're here, and then if a point comes where we need to move on, now we have the tools that we need to attach ourselves to a new community and fall in love with that place. I don't think that place attachment is, like a once and done thing, or, unlike maybe a romantic relationship where you really should only have the one person at a time. With place attachment, we can love lots of different places and feel attached to them. I think most of us have just the one place that we think of as home, and that has the most powerful influence in our lives right now. But we can have lots of places that we love and that shape us and create our ideals, and create meaning in our lives. That's one of the huge things I think about, especially with place identity, is that when we attach to a place passionately enough that we are contributing, that we're making things happen in our town, that we know people, that's a massive element of just creating a sense of meaning in our lives, helping to make us feel like we have purpose. And um, I think a strong purpose is connecting with your community and making it better.
I don't know that there are any better words to wrap this up on. That is a very, those are those are all the right ones. I think that's all incredibly important points and so valuable that what you get out of your place is what you put into it, and don't have multiple places at once. I think that is
Don't
it's
cheat
just
on
good
your
morals.
place.
Exactly.
I'll have to write that one down.
Yeah, Phil, I've seen you dabbling.
Phil has a roaming eye.
Yep.
What about this place?
Yeah.
That's funny.
I have done that a lot in my life. Like I wrote about that in the book. You know, you're on vacation, you pick up the little real estate guide. You're like, what if I lived here? And you know,
My
that's okay. But
Zillow and Airbnb, like that is where my wife spends all her time. Like she is a place. Hmm. I don't know the appropriate word for what she is, but it's
let's just say she's really interested in different places.
she's really interested. She likes to get around.
this is starting to be like one long double entendre, but but do you think about moving? Like, is she doing that because she just kind of like likes to fantasize, or is it like, Jeff, we need to get out of here?
No, we have no interest in moving. We love our neighborhood and aren't going anywhere. She just has has a roaming eye. She likes to fantasize. So, but no, it's more so vacation and not as much like other homes. But that happens occasionally. I mean, the same thing. It's like we go to visit a town. Like, what would it be like to live here?
Yeah, and I think that totally happens, and it's probably healthy to a certain extent to go visit a town and be like, this is a great community, and you know, what is going right in this town, and you know, is there any way to bring that back to where we live?
Right.
You know, we learn from those things.
This town cooks me pancakes on Saturday morning, and my town, nothing.
I want the pancakes.
Well, thank you very much, Melody. It was great to have you on. A good conversation. It's always fun to dig in with somebody else that thinks a lot about place. I hope that all of you will take the chance to go pick up a copy of This Is Where You Belong and follow Melody's work, because I dove in over the weekend and found a lot of great pieces that that were right along my kind of my sweet spot. A lot of just not only place, but family and a lot of stuff that was really appealing.
Thanks so much. It was a pleasure talking to you both today. Thanks for having me.
Thanks, Melody.
All right, Phil, you want to do the wrap up?
So, if you loved today's interview with Melody, you're in luck, because we have so much more amazing content, both on Pod Places, which you can listen to on iTunes and Spotify, or watch the videos that we post on our Facebook page. Speaking of which, we're also on Facebook. Proud Places on Facebook. We post every single day, multiple times a day, with all sorts of crazy place-focused stuff that you'll be interested in. You can also follow us on Instagram and Twitter to stay connected with us that way. We've got new meaty pieces of content going up every week on the website, proudplaces.com, from one of our 15 different amazing contributors, from people all related to place in all sorts of different ways: economic development, or social media, or consultants, all sorts of crazy stuff. So check it out on proudplaces.com. Follow us on our social media channels and listen to us on iTunes and Spotify.
Thank you.